Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I'm not going to name drop. I don't intend this as a name drop, but one of the people I know out there is Lewis Howes, and he's a top 10 podcaster, not top 10%, top 10. It's called School of Greatness. Check it out. But he's from Columbus, Ohio. That's where I'm at and where I met him. And I met him when he was, when he wasn't the Lewis he is today. He was living on his sister's couch, and he credits me as being one of his early mentors. Another guy, Chris Hawkins, was another one, and we helped him. But neither here nor there. That was 2007, 2008. Around 2010, Lewis was kind of off doing his stuff, and he was trying to get me to do this thing. I knew nothing about it. It was called podcasting. I'm like, oh, come on. It's just like I've got LinkedIn now. There's Facebook available. It's just like we were being overwhelmed with stuff, and it just kind of felt like another pardon the expression, another MLM, right? It's just like, okay, what is this? And I just politely said, no, I don't have the bandwidth for it. I just franchised my business. And podcasting wasn't just another, anything. It is what it is. I mean, it's slowly becoming a medium of itself. Really, and in fact, I credit podcasting with saving free speech, because you have people out there who can, in a longer format, kind of explain what's going on, whereas the news can put a quick spin on something, and you either, you have to take it or not. But anyhow, I have a guest on today, and he's Chris Daly. Chris is much like Lewis in that he was an early pioneer of podcasting. He continues with it today. But he's also a public speaker, author. He's a board game designer. I'm sure we'll touch on all of those things. But he helps people with starting podcasts. He helps people get on podcasts. He helps people advertise or get advertising on. I'm sure there's no easy to get people to take your money to advertise on their podcast. But anyhow, Chris, welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot, Frank. Wonderful introduction, and yes, I too love Lewis. I think he's done some amazing work.
Yeah, it's neat stuff. It really is. Board game designer. That was a new one. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, actually, that grew roundabout from podcasting.
Oh, okay.
Because now I've always been a board game lover, right?
Yeah.
But when I started podcasting in 2004, the fifth podcast in history was mine, called Lone Star Gridiron, which covered Texas high school football.
And it's still going, right?
It is still going. Not only is it going, football season starts next week, and there's like 30 shows a week that go out on that site. And so it grew into this website, Lone Star Gridiron. It became one of the top sites for news and information about Texas high school football. And we compiled all this historical data, over 100 years worth of data on every team in the state. We're talking 2,000 plus public schools. And my friend and I, who I founded it with, we were like, let's see if we can do a board game where you can play real high school football teams against each other based on their real stats. And so you can play Johnny Manziel's Kerrville Tivy team, against the Friday Night Lights one from the movies, or any team you want. Little did we know, after we created a Kickstarter and it did really well, people all over the country love this idea. So we have like 2,000 teams in the library right now. It's crazy.
Wow. It's amazing how these little things come out of nowhere, right? That's great. So you said the fifth show ever, right? Which is amazing. And you probably had people like me giving you pushback. It's like, this is kind of a wacky idea, this whole podcasting thing.
Oh yeah, completely. In fact, I spent all of 2005 traveling around the country, speaking to business groups, to college groups, saying, look, podcasting is here. You can be the media. It's going to change everything.
Yeah.
And I got blank stares and crickets. It was so early.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, people probably looked at you like, like they looked at their grandfather who spent time in the basement on the ham radio, right?
Right.
It just didn't make sense, right? I don't get this.
Yeah.
And I'm now at a point where I want to look at everything. As I sharing with my wife the story of Lewis. Yeah, you should have got on podcasting. Would have been basically 10 years earlier or 8 years earlier. And I don't know where that goes. I'm sure there are, for every Chris Daly and Lewis House out there, there's 6 people who just didn't see it through.
Well, I think you're way off on the numbers, because the numbers
Okay.
I saw, there have been 25 million podcasts created,
Mm-hmm.
and something like 98% never made it past episode 11.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's tough. You have to stick with it. I stuck with it because I love the medium, not because I was making any money at it until very recently.
Yeah. No, and that's been my MO. I think this is episode 752 or something like that. And I just keep after it. I just, okay, this is what I do. I water the plants. I do this. I have a podcast. I find people to interview, and everybody I come across. Okay, would this person have something interesting to say relative to my, networking, getting out there and developing relationships and contacts. And I just, plan to keep after it and not really worry too much about what comes of it in the short run. So, and I guess in the long run, if nothing comes from it, it's okay. Well, you know what? That's not true, because things have come from it, right? I'm talking to you. I wouldn't be talking to you, but for podcasting. And podcasting allowed me to reconnect with Lewis because I had questions from him. And so, and I have stumbled into, I can think of one franchisee I have directly related to it, because I reached out to the guy and said, hey, I'd like to be on your podcast. And he said, well, I don't do the show anymore. I'd love to have you on my show then. And he came on my show and we talked, and he became a franchisee. So anyhow, I guess let's talk about, podcasting, where you see it as a medium for really connections and building relationships.
Yeah, definitely. It's, I'm going to paraphrase the old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Podcasting is identical to that, in that connection, like you mentioned, that you build your brand authority, so people now pay attention to you. When you're 700 episodes in and you're talking consistently about stuff that you're knowledgeable about, the people are tuning in because they know, like, and trust you, right? So, it's like networking, but it's also one-on-one time. You are literally in their brain while they're driving their car or walking their dog, and you can't get a tighter relationship. A study came out earlier this year that showed the most trusted media personalities in the country are podcasters. And first impulse, you go, wow, that's amazing. But of course, nobody trusts the media, right?
Yeah.
But they trust podcasters because we're real. It's like you said, it saved free speech. It allows us to talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about. We leave the ums and the ahs, and we leave all that in there because that's real.
Yep.
And people trust that. They value that.
Yeah, no, I think that's I am somebody who keeps the ums and the ahs in. Probably for about the first 20, I was editing them out. Like, oh, I got to, it's just a lot of work, and it's not me. Just, well, there you go. There was an right there. It was just right there. You can have your own show. You can be on guests on shows. where do you see the difference, and what are the pluses and minuses with
Yeah.
each, as far as certainly building relationships, but the overall, I don't know, just what people are going to encounter if they decide to go either route?
Yeah, I do a presentation on why people should get involved in podcasting, and there's three ways. Obviously, do your own show. I think that is the gold standard of the best way to do it, because you get your voice out consistently,
Yeah,
and you get out the stories that you need to get out, and you build those tight relationships. But yes, it is a little bit of work, right? And that's why my company will do all that heavy lifting. We'll do the
sure.
editing, we'll do the post-production, we'll do all of that stuff. So all you have to do is get your message out. But if you can afford the time to record it, that's the most valuable. And there's a lot of tips and tricks we can talk about to make that easier, but that's the best one. Now, what I call the secret sauce is what you mentioned earlier, being a guest on a show.
Yeah,
That puts you in front of other people's audiences. And at the end of the day, that reach, that attention, you can't get anywhere else. You can get that by going on a stage. If Tony Robbins invites you to talk on his stage, you're in front of his audience. Just like this, I'm talking right now to your audience. You're on my show, you're talking to my audience. So that's goal one, because a lot of podcasters are looking for guests,
yeah,
just because that model is an easier one to do, to be a host and interview somebody versus just sit there and talk. That's tough for some people. So there's lots of opportunities. That's another thing we do, is help you find the right fit. You also mentioned advertising. That's the third one. At the very least, you should be advertising on podcasts. Find the right ones. Don't just throw stuff out there.
right.
But a study came out 2 weeks ago that said podcasting had the highest ROAS, return on ad spend, of any medium out there. Beats television, beats radio, beats social media influencers. It beats all of them. And the number it came up with was a 4.9x, which means you invest $1 advertising in a podcast. On average, you make $4.90 worth of sales. So that's like a magic machine. If you had a machine, you put a quarter in, $1 came out, you'd find every quarter you could.
Yeah, no, totally. Now, what do you say to the person that says, and I kind of went through this fear, I'm going to run out of things to talk about?
Yeah, that's a one that a lot of people get. I'm working with a gentleman right now who's launching one on freedom of speech,
Okay.
and the Constitution, and all this stuff. And he's like, I'm going to run out of things. And he sent me a sample script, and we'll talk about scripts too. He sent me a sample script for his first episode, and he hit 30,000-foot view of about 20 subjects. I said, there you go.
Yeah.
You get 20 episodes. Don't go into detail. Don't go so broad like that. Let's talk about one thing in that episode. And if you don't want to carry the load the whole way, do some interviews. Bring on some people to talk about things. It's pretty limitless. Once you get going, every episode, you think of 3 more episodes you could do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's totally key. Early on, I was like, all right, I can see, I looked at a couple of books that I had written. All right, here's the topic, here's the topic, here's the topic. All right, maybe I can get this thing to 100 episodes, maybe. And then what?
Yeah.
But then when I started interviewing people, or you just become in tune, you're looking for stories out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I've talked about this concept out here, but here's a perfect story that fits that concept. So
Right.
I'm revisiting the concept in a whole fresh way because I got the story. Or I can get somebody, like you, coming on and talking about podcasting. And I've had other people talk about podcasts. You have a unique perspective to it. But the other thing I find is that when I interview people, gives me ideas for other things.
Yeah.
They'll mention something and it's like, we're not going down that rabbit hole, but I'll write a note and it's like, I'm going to go look into that. And I'll then invite them back on, or I'll just, Chris Daly mentioned this and I did some research on it. I really want to talk about this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a pile of stuff. And I only do one a week. And the pile's growing, right? I mean,
Yes.
And that's just the reality of it. You just become in tune to whatever the topic is, the Constitution. Oh my God, there's,
Right. Yeah.
the Supreme Court's meeting every year or in session every year, and there's, stuff related to the Constitution. So
Yeah, there's 20 episodes in the Bill of Rights and there's only 10 bills, right?
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. What advice do you have for people? I guess, what advice do you have for somebody trying to find guests?
Mhm.
And then what advice might you have for people who are trying to be a guest?
Well, yeah, great questions, because trying to find guests is so easy. I mean, you go on social media and say,
Yeah.
I'm looking for guests on this subject, you'll get 600 people.
No, I mean, that's, and half of them don't fit, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
you'll have people like with mine. It's like, well, I networked once. Well, everybody has, even the Unabomber networked, I mean, that doesn't, that's not a unique story for me.
Right.
But you're totally right. It is easy to find guests.
Yeah, and that's where a service like what we do comes in handy, is because we can weed through and make sure it's a good guest.
Yeah.
Because that takes time. But again, it's time or money, right?
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that, as far as being a guest, reach out to the podcasters. They're all people.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Gitomer, the king of sales, who has written 20 something books on sales, public speaker, speaks in front of thousands. I sent him a message and said, "Hey, I want you to be on my show, and then I'd like to be on yours." It was done that week.
Yeah.
It's so easy. The head of uh, broadcast for the Tour de France for the last 40 years, Phil Liggett. I love Tour de France. I reached out to him. He was on my show. It's just so easy. They're
Yeah.
just
No,
people.
yeah. No, you're right. What I tell people is, because people will come to me and, hey, I want to be on your show. I'd be a great guest.
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Right.
Don't make me do the work. Don't make
Right.
me
Well,
have to.
that's one of the things we do in our guesting service, is we put together your speaker one sheet, because
Yeah.
that's everything. Just send that to them and let them read it. If it makes sense, they'll call. If it doesn't, they won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it doesn't make sense, be kind, be polite. You know what?
Yes.
I can only have so many guests, right? And if you don't fit, you don't fit. Yelling at me doesn't gonna make you fit. And people don't yell, but they're just, they just kind of press it. It's like, man, there's a million podcasts out there.
Right.
You know what? You'll be a great guest, just not on mine. Just
Right.
not on mine. Just accept that, and in fact, here, talk to this person. Talk
Right.
to this person. So, um, you have any stories, people landing clients by having podcasts or being guests on podcasts?
Yeah, I landed most of my stories from my podcast, or not most of my clients, I mean, from my podcast. I do
Yeah.
one for the Texas High School Coaches Association. It is the largest athletic coaches association in the world, 19,000 members.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big deal in Texas. It's a big deal nationwide, because everybody looks to Texas for
Sure.
coaching. It's done so differently here. But I had been doing some other shows, and got to know the head of the Coaches Association. In fact, he was retiring, so I also knew the head of the governing body of all interscholastic sports. Together, we wrote a book on the history of the Texas High School Coaches Association, the retiring director. So that got me in very tight with them. And then, when it's time for them to do a podcast, who are they going to call?
Yeah,
They're gonna call
right.
the podcast guy that's been doing all this stuff for them, right?
Yeah, no,
And they did.
absolutely.
Now we're on season 4 right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, early on, just my quick little history of podcasting, somebody was trying to get me to build a funnel, and I'm like, I don't want to build a funnel. It just doesn't seem genuine. I told the guy, I
Yeah.
said, it may work for some, it doesn't work for my highly relational sort of business.
Yes.
I'm selling a franchise, it's 10,000. I just don't feel it works. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I really just want to kind of share out good content with people. Well, you're talking about a podcast. Well,
Yeah.
okay, maybe I am. So I took a month and really kind of researched it. My daughter was working with me and that summer, and kind of pulled it together. And like I had indicated earlier, okay, I've got 100 episodes in me. Then what? And that's not nothing. Having, as you've indicated, a lot of people
Sure.
quit at episode 6.
Yeah.
And like, all right, I'm going to head down this particular path. And it's a learning curve, right? You take your clients up a learning curve. And I got to about 30, and somebody said, you ever thought about having a guest? You should have guests. And I remember being angry inside, because it was like, I got to learn something else. Oh my God, I don't want to learn anything else. I just got this podcasting thing down.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I need to embrace this. And then I started reaching out. Well, maybe I can be guests on people's show. And I talked to a guy out in DC, and he said, Frank, you don't fit on my show. You can't be on my show, but I could be on yours. And I resisted the temptation to be petty and say, well, if I'm not going to be on yours, you can't be on mine, because that's not fair.
Sure.
And so I let him explain why. And he said, you know what? I have a podcast. It's geared towards sales, VPs and managers in the DC area. He that's all I talk about, all I talk to. I bring my audio team in to do in office. This is all pre-COVID. I don't know what he did through COVID, but that was his way of getting through the gatekeeper. Because when he was calling people up, Chris, hey, I want to speak to Miss or Mr. Johnson. And they were like, I'm so-and-so consultant,
Nope.
yeah, sure. Yep. It goes nowhere. Hey, I'd like to speak with Miss or Mr. Johnson, about being on my podcast. Hold on a second. The call gets right through. He gets into the office, he develops these. I'm like, oh my God, this is so genius. Just that this is a relationship tool.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
I've got a whole spreadsheet of all the people I've talked to, and I'm sure I could reach out to any of them and say, hey, what's going on? You want to get back on the show? Can you give me some information on this? So
right.
Anyhow.
Yeah, and another quick story of getting a customer from podcasting. This one wasn't a guest. It was a lady who had listened to some of the other shows, and she's the director. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. We haven't inked it yet, but it's the next call after this one.
Oh, good.
The Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, the International Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, and they are excited. They want to get it going right now. But none of that would have happened without me being out there doing podcasts.
Yeah, no, you've kind of hung in there, and it's kind of full circle. That's Lewis's story. I mean, Lewis didn't win a lottery ticket. He worked hard.
He built a lottery ticket.
He built a lottery. Thank you. Yeah, he built it, and people lose sight of that, all the work that went into it. But you find something and you just kind of stick with it. And it doesn't have to be podcasting. It can be whatever subject matter, but podcasting is that vehicle where you can kind of get, I want to talk nothing about, I want to talk about things related to the Constitution or the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame or whatever it is. So,
if I had a piece of advice real quick on that, do not do a general show about everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Because nobody will listen except for your mother.
Well, and to be honest, you probably, I don't know, but to me, it would seem like it would be monotonous. Yeah. Everyone would be this, okay, where am I with this? How does this fit in?
Well, and why should I value what you think about everything?
Yeah.
Now, if you have an expertise in a subject, now I'll listen. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, shift gears. how do people get a hold of you? I mean, when we talk about your business, I know you have a little bit, people, you have different packages,
Yeah. My parent company is Fresh Media Works. It's a 30-year marketing company. We do, you name it. So everything is at freshmediaworks.com, and you can click under podcasting, and that's where you can we do a free strategy session where we break down, should you be doing it? If you should, what kind it should be, what the format should be, the length, the duration, all that stuff. And that's all free. And then if it makes sense, then we go on to a launch. And then the same thing you mentioned earlier about guesting and about advertising, we can do all of that stuff. But in addition, we're doing a lot right now with training people on artificial intelligence as well. And that's all there on the website, easy to find. As far as social media, you did pronounce my name correctly, Chris Daly, but it's spelled funky, Doelle, which, the plus side is that means I'm very easy to find on socials. I'm the only Doelle out there, and I'm everywhere, so I'm easy to find.
Okay, well, I'll certainly get that. I'll spell it correctly in the show notes. But if somebody, just to be clear, somebody says, you know what, I don't want a podcast, I just want to get on shows.
Yes.
That's what you guys will help them do that as well.
There's, you go to freshmediaworks.com under podcasting, guesting services is there.
All right, great. Well, I appreciate your time today. This has been wonderful. If you do know of guests, if you have clients, you know who I am and where I'm at. So I'm always looking for interesting people to have on the show. But thanks for your time.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.